being said, the membership piece is important because those members who actually own a piece in their co-op live and engage in that co-op on a daily basis, which in contrast is very different and culturally very different than an investor-owned business, where the owners of an investor-owned business may live thousands, tens of thousands, or hundreds of miles away from their investment business. In fact, today, much of the ownership of some of our business comes from a very wide area of the United States or even in foreign countries on stock in America. So the ownership piece is an important piece that generates the control of that particular co-op, because that's what forms the basic for the equity that the co-ops have. The second piece I want to talk about is the control. As a member, as an owner of your co-op, it's up to you to decide how do you want to govern your particular co-op. You do that through a board of directors. You elect a board of directors of your peers, and those board of directors are elected on a democratic basis. So it's not the individual who owns the most or does the most business through the co-op has more control than you do. Everybody is equal in their ability to choose who they want their next representative to be. Now, a co-op board of directors is a very unique position because you, as a member of the board of directors, actually control and govern the ongoing operations of the cooperative. And you do that by either hiring a management team or certainly supervising that particular management team. But you still have to be accountable to the member owners. At an annual basis or once a year, you are responsible to providing reports back on how the co-op is doing, what services that you're providing. Very successful co-ops do a nice job of having member meetings throughout the years, just discussion meetings to find out what are the new needs that each individual member has. So if the co-op needs to change or modify its list of services it provides to its members, it can do that easily. The control is an important piece. The control is a very important piece because as a business owner, and by controlling your own business, you can have much more say in what actually takes place. One of the examples that I use about when the first co-op began goes back to a story that I heard years ago when I was in grade school and learned about the Mayflower Compact. When the Mayflower first came over and the settlers from Europe first came to America, that first year each of them gathered on the Mayflower because they had convinced the captain of the ship to stay throughout the winter so they had at least some kind of shelter or some kind of protection there. But they did something very unique. In North America, the first group of settlers decided to sign the Mayflower Compact, which is a way that each individual that was on the Mayflower staying in America that first winter because they had nowhere else to go, pledged themselves to each other's for survival's sake. Co-ops are very similar by pledging themselves to each other for mutual benefit to work together in this way. So that particular control is an important part of the self-governing part of the cooperative model. The last piece I'd like to go over is how do profits get passed back to the member owners. And this is an important part because it's different in the cooperative model than it is in the investor-owned business model. In the investor-owned business model, if you own 25% of the company and your partner owns 25% of the company, then together you will always get 50% of the profits back because of your ownership stream. But in a cooperative, if you own you can have ownership in the co-op, but your profits come back to you through patronage in a manner that's based on how much you actually use the co-op. So instead of getting paid your share of the profits based on ownership, in a co-op, your share of the profits come back to you through patronage based on how much you use the cooperative. Most co-ops do pay taxes on earnings that the co-op keeps themselves. But if you can imagine that a co-op is owned, it's like a pizza pie. Everybody has an individual slice, an individual ownership piece. If the co-op decides they want to retain some of the profits at the end of the year to invest in new assets, to start a new business or some kind of new service for the member owners, then generally the co-op would be paying the taxes on that particular portion of the business. There are a few exceptions out there, but generally the co-op would pay for those profits that they retain. Now, if your share of the ownership on the other parts that they want to pass back to the member owners, then the co-op would pass money back to the members through patronage. So at the end of the year, if the co-op made, let's say, $10,000, they needed to keep 4,000 of those dollars for renewed investment in the business. The co-op would pay taxes on the $4,000. But the balance of the $6,000 would come back to the member owners, and it would come back to them based on how much they used the co-op. So if you did 10% of the use of the co-op, then those you would get $600 back, and you would be responsible for paying the income taxes on that $600 because that would be your share of the profits. We also have another unique way of passing that patronage back, because it all doesn't have to get passed back through cash. Some of it can be passed back in cash. Some of it can be passed back as equity credit. It's common in rural electrics or ag supply co-ops or other cooperatives that require very high levels of capital assets that 20, 30, 40% of that cash, of that patronage, come back to you in cash, but the remaining 80, 70, or 60% come to you in equity credit. Equity credit would be additional amount of stock that you're given in the co-op. It's a claim on the assets, a share of equity stock. Yes, you've received it as earnings, you have paid taxes on that, but you don't receive it as cash. You receive it as an equity credit that will be revolved to you and paid to you at a later date. Because in these high infrastructure co-ops, it's important that those co-ops generate amount of equity necessary to run those businesses. And the board of directors determines when that stock will be revolved back to you at a future date.